So there's a lot of content out there about different productivity tips and how to use them and why they're useful. But what I don't hear a lot about is how you can struggle with trying to implement these in your own life. How difficult and frustrating they can be, even when you know that they're going to be useful and valuable, to still just not be able to do them consistently to build a good habit around them. So in this video, I'm going to talk about the 5 productivity tips that when I've actually managed to be able to use them, I found them incredibly valuable, but even still, I struggle to use them consistently. So the first tip that I struggle with is the daily highlight. I used to make this long list of things that I wanted to get done during the day, and it would be a little bit overwhelming, and I found that I was just knocking off the things that were easiest, and I wasn't making any meaningful progress towards the things that actually mattered. So I cut it back to just doing one daily highlight, but that was still a struggle because I would either make it way too difficult and I would just not make any progress because it was just too much, too insurmountable to do in a day, or I would make it way too easy, at which point it just became another easy box checking exercise. And the struggle with the daily highlight that I find is just trying to find that sweet spot between not too easy and not too difficult. Something that's just slightly out of reach of your current capabilities while still making it a meaningful action for you to do during the day. What's the next action comes from David Allen's book, Getting Things Done. And this one is also closely related to the daily highlight. Because I found that I was setting a daily highlight that was this big grandiose outcome that I wanted to achieve. But what I really should be doing if I want to make meaningful progress is think about what is the next action I need to take. It's very easy when you think of the outcome to get discouraged into thinking that you can't make any progress. You don't have a roadmap from getting from where you are to where you want to go. So now, whenever I come up with an idea or something that I want to get done or a project, I always try to frame it in terms of what is the next thing that I need to do. So if I want to, say, film this video, then I'll always remind myself that the next thing I need to do is I need to set up my lights, I need to get my camera, I need to make sure that my battery is charged. What are these little things that are going to help me make progress towards the big goal that I want to do? And if you can think in terms of action instead of outcomes, it just becomes so much easier to make progress. But the challenge is reminding yourself to actually think in those terms of next action steps. I also wanted to let everyone know that my website, jeffreyweber.com, is now live. You can go there and sign up for my newsletter, The Weekly Pearl, where I'll be sending out every Monday an email with what I've been pondering, enjoying, actioning, what's been resonating with me, and what I've been learning over the last week. And you can also find my blog on my website where I'm just going to be writing about different thoughts and ideas that I have. So time blocking or calendar blocking is another one that I struggle with, I think for a couple different reasons. One is having a child makes it hard to strictly regiment how your day is going to go. I mean, you can make all the plans in the world, but it's never going to happen the way that you think it is. And the other one is the time commitment that you need to put in up front to thinking about what it is that you want to do and when do you want to do it. And it feels sometimes like you just want to jump in to doing. But I think this is a pretty valuable tip because the little bit of time that I do have to myself, either when my daughter is away or when she's asleep at night, those few hours, if I actually took the time to plan what it is that I wanted to do during that time, then rather than getting to that point and thinking about, okay, now what do I want to do? I already have it in mind. I can just get busy with doing what I need to do. But still, it's that commitment by putting it down in the calendar, by writing out that you want to do. It does feel like a struggle because you feel like you're committing yourself to something, and that can be a challenge in addition to the time that you have to invest into thinking. Thinking is uncomfortable, but if you could just get through that initial level of discomfort and plan out what it is that you actually want to do with the time that you have available, then I think the struggle would be worth it so much. The next tip is probably the easiest one that I've come across, but for some reason is one of the hardest ones to consistently do, and that's the 5-minute rule. So if you want to do something, just tell yourself that you're only going to do it for 5 minutes. If you think about a project that's going to take you 2 hours, that's going to be hard to sit down and commit to doing. But if you just sit down and say, I'm just going to work on this thing for 5 minutes, typically you can overcome that initial resistance to doing it. But I don't know if I've like psyched myself out into associating that, hey, 5 minutes actually means an hour's worth of work or 2 hours worth of work. But there's just something about not being able to commit to 5 minutes for something. I haven't quite figured out the framing to use this tip more consistently, but every time that I manage to do it, to say, okay, let's just sit down and do this for 5 minutes, I'm amazed at how quickly I'm actually able to get into the flow state and accomplish so much more than I thought I actually was going to be able to. So I just need to play around with it a bit more so that it can become a more consistent habit to doing meaningful, deep work rather than just always going from one shallow thing to the next. And speaking of shallow work, of going from one thing to the next and not really getting into a deep workflow state, the one thing that I struggle with is batching my tasks. And I think there's a couple reasons for this. Number one is being pulled into the novelty of checking for a new email or checking Twitter or checking my YouTube analytics. Just that dopamine hit of the newness just pulls you in, and it makes it hard to kind of sit down and do a whole bunch of the same thing over and over again. And the other thing I think is kind of a lack of planning ahead, of just doing one thing start to finish without setting up a system to get things to a certain point where you can actually meaningfully batch things together. So if you haven't checked out my previous video on my progressive content creation system, this is something that I created to help me be able to batch more effectively, because it can make it so much easier to do these things when you do them all at once. Like, for instance, filming, I find it so hard to overcome the resistance to get in front of the camera and start speaking. And if I have to do that 10 different times for 10 different videos, it just becomes a drain on me mentally and emotionally. But if I can set up the system so that I can do, 3 videos at once or 4 videos at once for recording, then that drastically reduces the amount of resistance that I have to encounter in order to do it. And plus, doing it over and over, the more I talk in front of the camera, the more comfortable I get. So it actually improves the quality of what you do if you can batch it. So those are the 5 productivity tips that I've tried to and am trying to implement in my life that I still struggle with, and why I struggle with them. And in making this video, I realized that even though you know something is valuable, and even though that you've demonstrated how valuable it can still be such a pain, such frustration to actually implement it, to replace your previous bad habits with this new valuable thing. So even though you know it's useful, don't beat yourself up because you're struggling with it. Don't think that you don't have the willpower to actually implement these things. If there's one thing that I've learned from all of them, is design your systems, design your environment to replace those bad habits more easily, to build the new ones. Don't rely on just knowing that something is useful and that you'll be able to implement it consistently, because that is not going to be enough. We need help, and it's okay to have help from your environment, from how your computer is set up, from how your phone is set up, to anything that you can do that's going to help make implementing useful things more easy in your life. So if you have any tips or tricks for how you've implemented different productivity strategies or ideas in your life, how you've designed your life and systems to reduce those struggles that you come across, or how you frame the struggles internally to realize that it's okay, that it is not a knock against you, that you don't have to always be perfect in implementing these things, to give yourself a little bit of a break and lay off on the self-judgment. I would love to hear about it down in the comments below, and I will see you all next time.